Is NATO on the brink of financial collapse? With economic troubles hitting Europe and the ongoing war in Ukraine draining resources, the US is demanding its allies spend more on defense. But can they afford it? And what does this mean for the future of NATO? Let's break it down. NATO, the world's most powerful military alliance, is facing a financial reckoning. Currently, the United States spends around $968 billion on defense, while the rest of NATO combined, Germany, France, the UK, and other member states, spend about $507 billion. This massive imbalance has led to tensions between the US and its European allies. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine has further strained NATO's resources, as billions are being funneled into military aid and support. For years, NATO members agreed to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. However, not all countries have met this goal. In fact, as of 2023, more than half of NATO's European members still fell short. The US, frustrated by this, is now demanding members increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP, a move that could further strain already struggling European economies. The war in Ukraine has only escalated this demand, as NATO faces increasing pressure to bolster its defenses against a growing Russian threat. Europe is facing significant economic challenges. High inflation, sluggish growth, and an energy crisis have left many governments hesitant to increase military spending. Countries like Germany, France, and Italy are already dealing with high taxes and growing debt. The war in Ukraine has only made things worse, as European nations have had to spend billions in aid and military supplies. With economies in decline, increasing defense expenditures could force difficult trade-offs between security and essential social welfare programs. The US currently has over 100,000 military personnel stationed in Europe, along with strategic air bases, intelligence hubs, and naval assets. This presence has been key to NATO's deterrence against threats like Russia. However, there is growing debate within the US about whether it should continue carrying such a heavy financial burden, especially with rising internal issues and increasing competition from China. With the war in Ukraine continuing, some policymakers argue that European nations must step up and take more responsibility for their own defense. Russia has been ramping up its military spending, allocating 7% of its GDP to sustain the war in Ukraine. This prolonged conflict has drained European resources, as NATO members have collectively spent over $100 billion in aid to Ukraine. Yet, despite their efforts, the war continues with no clear end in sight. Meanwhile, Russia has managed to sustain its military operations through partnerships with China, Iran, and North Korea. The question remains: can Europe afford to keep supporting Ukraine while also increasing their own defense spending? The growing divide in NATO has sparked strong opinions from global leaders. US President Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized NATO allies, stating, "We are paying for their protection, and they're not even paying their fair share. That's not how alliances work." Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron warned, "We must not be dependent on the United States for our security. Europe must take charge of its own defense." German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has acknowledged the pressure, stating, "Germany will continue to support NATO, but we must also ensure our economy remains strong and sustainable." Meanwhile, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has urged unity, declaring, "Now is not the time for division. We must strengthen our defenses and stand together against common threats." So, what happens next? Will European nations agree to the 5% demand? Many leaders, including those in Germany and France, are reluctant, fearing backlash from their citizens. Meanwhile, the US is hinting at shifting its focus to the Pacific, leaving Europe to handle its own security. With economic instability, a prolonged war in Ukraine, and increasing global threats, NATO faces an uncertain future. If member nations cannot find a balance between defense spending and economic stability, the alliance may weaken, leaving Europe vulnerable. NATO stands at a crossroads. Will it emerge stronger, or will financial struggles and political disputes weaken the alliance? One thing is clear: the future of global security depends on the choices made today. What do you think? Should European nations boost their defense spending, or is NATO headed for trouble? Let us know in the comments. The world is changing fast. Don't just watch it, understand it. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and explore more global political insights with us. Thank you for watching the Uncensored History.